February 24, 2022. What would you do if the horizon suddenly filled with warships? The radio cracked with a demand for surrender. And you knew that in a few minutes the tiny patch of rock beneath your boots might become your grave. A lonely island where the wind howls across broken concrete and the sea carries the echo of explosions? That is exactly the nightmare that unfolded on Snake Island, a remote rocky outpost in the northwest Black Sea belonging to Ukraine. Barely 0.17 square kilometers in size, but suddenly one of the most dangerous places on Earth when the full-scale invasion by Russia began. Because this lonely slab of stone controlled shipping lanes, radar coverage, and the gateway to Ukraine's southern coast. And on that cold February morning, a small group of Ukrainian border guards woke to the distant thunder of engines as silhouettes of Russian warships emerged from the fog, including the powerful missile cruiser, Russian cruiser Moskva, the flagship of Russia's Black Sea Fleet, whose guns and missiles could level the island in minutes. Imagine standing there with barely a few dozen defenders, some rifles, a few machine guns, and the knowledge that there would be no quick rescue. Only the sound of waves slamming against the cliffs and the steady approach of a fleet that carried hundreds of sailors and devastating firepower. And then the radio message arrived, calm, cold, almost casual, ordering the defenders to surrender or face destruction. A moment that felt less like a battlefield and more like a horror film where the monster has already locked the door behind you. Because the men on Snake Island knew the truth. If those warships opened fire, the island would become a burning crater surrounded by black water. What happened next turned a tiny forgotten rock into a legend of modern warfare, because instead of surrendering quietly, one Ukrainian defender famously answered with a phrase that echoed across the world. A defiant response that stunned the Russian crew listening on the other end and instantly transformed the isolated garrison into a symbol of resistance. But the bravery did not stop the bombardment that followed. As Russian guns thundered and missiles slammed into radar towers and barracks, ripping the island apart with blasts that sent shards of metal flying through the air while the defenders scrambled through smoke and debris. Some diving into bunkers, others firing back with whatever weapons they had. And for several terrifying minutes, the entire island shook like a drum under artillery fire. Waves splashing red in the fading light, while radio communications flickered in and out, leaving the defenders unsure whether anyone on the mainland even knew they were still alive. At first the world believed the men on Snake Island had all been killed, turning them into instant martyrs of the war. Yet the truth was stranger and more complicated, because many of the defenders had actually been captured after the bombardment and taken prisoner. Their story spreading across social media as Ukrainians rallied behind their courage. And suddenly this tiny island became a psychological battlefield as well as a military one. A place where symbols mattered almost as much as missiles. Because whoever controlled Snake Island could watch the sea routes leading to the Ukrainian ports of Odessa and Mykolaiv, potentially choking off trade and threatening grain exports that feed millions around the world. But war rarely stays quiet for long, and in the weeks that followed the island became the scene of relentless strikes, drone attacks, and daring missions that tested the endurance of both sides. With Ukrainian forces launching repeated attempts to hit Russian equipment stationed there, using drones and aircraft flying low over the sea while Russian anti-aircraft systems tried to swat them from the sky, turning the island into a deadly chessboard where every radar antenna and missile launcher mattered. And one of the most dramatic chapters came months later when Ukrainian intelligence tracked the movements of the Moskva, the very cruiser that had threatened the island on the first day of the invasion. A massive warship bristling with missiles that had dominated the Black Sea for years. But on April 13, 2022, Ukrainian anti-ship missiles streaked across the water and struck the cruiser, triggering explosions and fires that spread through the vessel's decks. forcing the crew to abandon ship as flames lit up the night sky. And when the Moskva eventually sank beneath the waves, it became one of the most shocking naval losses of the war. A moment that changed the balance of power in the region and proved that even the mightiest warships were vulnerable. Back on Snake Island, however, the fighting grew even more intense as Russian forces attempted to turn the rocky outpost into a fortified base with radar systems and air defenses. Yet the island's isolation became a curse as much as an advantage, because every supply run required ships or helicopters crossing waters now patrolled by Ukrainian drones and missiles. And several times those supply missions ended in disaster, with helicopters shot down or landing craft destroyed before they could unload cargo, leaving Russian troops stranded among shattered buildings and twisted metal under the relentless summer sun, sleeping in makeshift bunkers carved into the rock while Ukrainian artillery from the mainland hammered the island day after day. Soldiers later described nights there as something out of a nightmare, the sky flashing with distant explosions while the wind carried the smell of burning fuel and salt water. And at times the only sound between bombardments was the eerie cry of seabirds, circling above the wreckage as if waiting for the next casualty. A haunting reminder that the island had become less a military post and more a trap surrounded by dark water. Finally, on June 30th, 2022, after months of constant attacks and logistical nightmares, Russian forces withdrew from Snake Island, calling it a gesture of goodwill, though military analysts widely believed the real reason was simple survival, because holding that exposed rock had become too costly, too dangerous, and too symbolic for either side to ignore. And when Ukrainian troops later returned to raise their flag over the battered island, they found a landscape scarred by craters, burnt vehicles, and abandoned equipment. Silent evidence of how fiercely both sides had fought over a place smaller than many city parks. Yet the story of Snake Island is not just about strategy or geography. It is about the strange way war transforms ordinary people into legends overnight. Because the border guards who answered that radio call on the first day could not have known their words would echo around the world, inspiring millions and turning a remote outpost into one of the most recognizable battlefields of the conflict. A reminder that sometimes the most important moments in history happen in places so small they barely appear on a map. And even now, when you look at images of the island, the lonely lighthouse, the shattered radar towers, the cliffs battered by endless waves, it is hard not to imagine the fear those defenders must have felt when the warships appeared on the horizon. The moment when courage had to overpower terror because surrender meant losing more than just an island. So here's the question that keeps historians and soldiers talking. Was Snake Island truly worth the blood, the ships, and the months of relentless fighting? Or did its real power lie in the message it sent to the world about defiance against overwhelming force? Drop your thoughts in the comments and share this story with someone who loves war history, because sometimes the smallest battlefield holds the biggest story.